Thank you, Bianca, for that. I'm just going to repeat what I said. Hello everyone, and welcome to the second webinar series hosted by Hasiru Dala that focuses on the Global Plastic Treaty. It's been a year since the president of the fifth UN Environment Assembly gavelled in the historic resolution tabled by Rwanda and Peru to start negotiations on an internationally legally binding plastic treaty to end plastic pollution in Nairobi, Kenya. Post that, at the recently concluded INC 1, Kenya and South Africa announced the Just Transition Initiative for waste pickers and other workers in the plastic value chain. That is post the launch of the group of Friends of Waste Pickers. And so, today's topic for the webinar is ground realities. What does a just transition look like? We know that waste pickers at the ongoing International Negotiating Committee discussions advocated for inclusion, for an inclusive guidelines towards a just transition, meaning the inclusion of provisions to integrate informal waste workers and pickers in any internationally agreed treaty to handle the plastic waste. However, the conversations tend to stay at the level of principle and, and necessity. So, what are the practical requirements to ensure just transition, and how does such a movement happen? To discuss this and more, I would like to welcome our guests for today. First up, Indumati, who's a waste entrepreneur and the Asian representative to the Global Plastic Treaty discussions at the INC 1 in December 2022. Welcome, Indumati. Second, we have John Chua, the chairman of the Kenya National Waste Picker Welfare Association. John, my apologies if I've pronounced your last name wrong. Just a little bit about John. John is a waste picker based in Kenya. He started waste picking at the age of 13. Through his work as a waste picker, he noticed all the inequalities and injustice that affect the waste pickers in the community, despite their integral role that they play in providing livelihoods and in improving the environmental conditions in their cities. At the age of 18, he started organizing waste pickers to defend and protect their interested rights. In 2021, he got elected as the chairman of the National Association of Waste Pickers in Kenya. He is also a member of the International Alliance of Waste Pickers. Welcome, John. Our third speaker for today is Lubna. Lubna actually needs no introduction. Lubna Ananthakrishnan is a managing trustee at the Kashtakari Panchayat, where she leads the Recycling Livelihoods and Sustainability Initiative. She has worked extensively on waste picker inclusive models for plastic waste management and on setting up and supporting cooperative waste picker run enterprises. She has been involved in the national and international advocacy efforts for inclusive extended producer responsibility policy as well. Our fourth speaker for today, Saloni Goel. She is the head of the Circular Economy and Plastic Waste Management Initiative at UNDP India. Prior to that, Saloni also served as a climate change specialist at Niti Aayog. She has led sanitation work during the Kumbh Mela in 2019, which is the world's largest mass gathering of over 240 million visitors, delivering an open, defecation-free and garbage-free and order-free event. She also has a Guinness record was also registered for this work. She's also worked in UNEP on marine litter and plastic pollution and the World Bank funded UP Health System Strengthening Project, pioneering a smart biomedical waste management system that has been adopted for statewide implementation. Our moderator for today's speaker, Nalini Shekar, unfortunately had an emergency and so she couldn't join in. So I'm Pinky Chandran and I am a trustee at Hasiru Dala. I'm also an independent journalist and researcher, and I track policy related developments in the plastic waste space. So I'm gonna be your host for today. Without much further ado, I would like to start off with the questions. Lubna, you're first up. We all know that the plastic waste crisis also has an environmental dimension, but there's also a significant social dimension to the plastic waste crisis. Unfortunately, the dimension has often been sidelined. Waste pickers who carry out most of the collection work are at the bottom of the pyramid in the plastic value chain, and they hardly benefit from anything. They are only compensated for the quantities of waste that they collect, but they are never under any consideration for the working hours that they spend in doing so. Given this scenario, how would you define what is a just transition? And given your work, both at KKPKP and Swatch, can you set the context for what a just transition would look like? Look, now over to you, and may I please request all the speakers to please turn on their cameras.
Thank you, Pinky, and hi, everyone. Just do let me know if you're not able to hear me for any reason. I'm very happy to be involved on this panel. I really agree that these discussions really do tend to be at the level of principle. So I'll just dive right into some of the details. When we talk about a just transition in recycling, it's really coming up now because of all of the movement in the plastics context, particularly in the environmental and plastics context. But one thing that I think is getting eclipsed in this discussion is that there is a very strong link with solid waste management as well. And you cannot think about recycling without thinking of solid waste management. And waste pickers are not only at the bottom of the recycling chain, they're also in some sense part of the waste management of the city, whether or not they are formally part of it. So I think what a just transition looks like begins first and foremost with recognizing waste pickers' positions functionally in both of those systems and formalizing and cementing that position. And what that really means, which is something that the Swatch model in Pune is able to do, most importantly, which is a couple of things, is first to secure the access to waste for waste pickers. It is not converting a waste picker's job into a different form of employment within that system. So you're not creating jobs as drivers and kind of lifting materials here to there. You're actually allowing waste pickers to capitalize on what their skills are. So you're allowing them to generate income through waste picking, but within this kind of formal system. The second thing that it does is it addresses the problem at the scale of the problem. Often what you see with some solutions where integration or a just transition is proclaimed is where you've kind of marginalized or wiped out all of the informal sector players in the city and set up, say, a large material recovery facility where you will have 50 or 60 or 70 people working there. And I say people because it's usually not women. And at least in Pune, most waste pickers are women. And when their jobs get converted into these factory style sorting facilities, they many times don't have the ability to get those kind of jobs. They don't have the ability or the freedom to actually work for those many hours in the day, 8 or 10 hour shifts, because they are running their own households and they have many other responsibilities. And these are the kind of jobs where men can compete women out of the space once it becomes all about efficiency and productivity and how much heavy lifting is one able to do. And so not only does it kind of fall short on the count of scale, where you would displace, say, 5,000 people and then integrate maybe 100, it also falls short on actually integrating the right people. So what is important to just transition is that the system is really designed to cement what is already happening. So what is already happening is that waste pickers are sorting and recovering, reclaiming whatever they can that is recyclable and moving it from the waste management system into the recycling system. And what, say, the Swatch cooperative does in Pune is formalize this and is kind of cement this access to waste and the right of waste pickers to actually earn an income from this. Again, um, getting into a few more complications, this isn't enough because, like Pinky said, it's not enough to just pay for their waste. So under this system, they also get paid for the service they provide citizens, which is going to the doorsteps and picking up the waste. You don't need to go to the end of your lane and you don't have a vehicle coming where you need to transport the waste to it. And so that's a service provided by waste pickers that they get compensated for. Still more than that, they are contributing to the public health of the city. And so we have insisted that the city government pay health insurance premiums and afford some of these social protections to waste pickers as well. So it isn't limited to a simple intervention. It really is kind of an all encompassing one. But that is how interventions need to be designed if we're really talking about a just transition and not a box ticking kind of integration for waste pickers. I'll pause there.
Thank you. I think you rightly said. I think you can't look at it from a textbook definition of when you talk about integrating waste pickers, because most often the solution is to formalize waste pickers into a factory setup. And I think you've touched a very important point. I think what is often missing is the fact that you fail to recognize their inherent entrepreneurial abilities. And so I would like to now invite our next speaker, Indumati. Indumati also has represented Asia at the recent INC deliberations, and Indumati has been championing just transitions. Indumati, may I please request you to share your experience at the INC, and also if you can demystify some of your ask in terms of what exactly would just transition mean for you. So if you can articulate your demands, that'd be great. Please do speak in Kannada and I'll be happy to translate.
ಇಂದುಮತಿ ಅವರೇ, ಸೊ ಪಿಂಕಿ ಏನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಿಮ್ದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್ INC ಉರುಗ್ವೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಿತ್ತು ಮತ್ತೆ ಏನ್ ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡಿದೀರಾ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಸೊ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದಾ?
ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಏನ್ ನಾವು ಉರುಗುವೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಒಂದು ಮಾತುಕತೆಯನ್ನ ನಡೆಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ವಿ, ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಟಿಟಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ. ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಉರುಗುವೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು 2 ದಿನ ಮೌಂಟೋ ವಿಡಿಯೋದಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಯಾಕೆ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಾ ದೇಶದವರು ಬಂದಿದ್ರು, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಸೌತ್ ಆಫ್ರಿಕಾ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕೆನ್ಯಾ, ಚಿಲ್ಲೆ, ಉರುಗುವೆ, ನಮ್ ಏಷ್ಯಾದಿಂದ ನಾವು ಹೋಗಿದ್ವಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ತರ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ದೇಶಗಳು ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ಬಂದಿದ್ರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ಒಂದು ನಾವೇ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಒಂದು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ, ನಮ್ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನ್ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಗಳಿದೆ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ಗೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಯಾಕೆ ಬ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಇಂದಾನೇ ನಾವು 60% ನಾವು ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಇಂದಾನೇ ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ. ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ 22 ಕೋಟಿ ಜನನು ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಪಂಚದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರಲ್ಲೇ ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ. ಇದನ್ನ ಯಾಕೆ ಬ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಗೊತ್ತಾಯ್ತು ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೇನ್ ಕೆಮಿಕಲ್ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಗೊತ್ತಾಯ್ತು. ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್, ನಮ್ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ನಾವು ಏನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಮಾತುಕತೆ ನಡೆಸ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ ಡಿಮ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನ್ ಕೇಳೋಣ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅಂತ ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಮಾತುಕತೆ ನಡೆಸಿದಾಗ ನಾವು ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ 4 ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ನಾವು ತಗೊಂಡ್ವಿ. ಏನು, ಅವರು ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಫಿಲ್ ನ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ. ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಫಿಲ್ ನ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಸಾವಿರ ಜನ, ಲಕ್ಷಾಂತರ ಜನ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಫಿಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಿಷನ್ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ಕೊಟ್ಟು, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಯನ್ನ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಕೆಲ್ಸಗಳು, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಡೋರ್ ಟು ಡೋರ್ ಕಲೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಸಗ್ರಿಗೇಷನ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಈ ಅಗ್ರಿಗೇಷನ್ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಆ ತರ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೆಲ್ಸವನ್ನ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಫಿಲ್ ಅನ್ನ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಫಸ್ಟ್ನೇ ಡಿಮ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಇಕ್ಕಿದ್ವಿ. 2ನೇದು ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಬ್ಬೊಬ್ರು ಒಂದೊಂದು ತರ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಬಟ್ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಡೋರ್ ಟು ಡೋರ್ ಕಲೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡೋರಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ರೋಡಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಆಯೋರಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಫಿಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋರಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಸೈಕಲ್ಗಳು ಹಾಕೊಂಡು ಡಬ್ಬಾ ಬಾಟ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಪರ್ಚೇಸ್ ಮಾಡೋರಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ರೋಡ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಂಗಡಿಗಳು ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿರೋರಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇವರೆಲ್ಲಾನು ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋಂತ ಅಂತವ್ರಾಗಿ, ಡ್ರೈವರ್, ಹೆಲ್ಪರ್ ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲೇ ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಅಂತವ್ರು. ಇವ್ರಿಗೆಲ್ಲಾನು ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಿಷನ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬೇಕು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೀವು ಇಷ್ಟೂನು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ಗೆ ಸೇರ್ತಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ತಿಳಿಸಿದ್ವಿ. 3ನೇದು ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಏನಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ನಾವು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ ಆಗಿ ಇಷ್ಟು ದೂರ ಬಂದು ಮಾತುಕತೆ ನಡೆಸಂತ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನಮಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಬಂದು ಮಾತುಕತೆ ನಡೆಸೋದಿಕ್ಕೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡಿ, ಅಟ್ಲೀಸ್ಟ್ ಒಂದು 6 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ವಿ. 6 ಜನ ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದಾಗ ಒಂದೊಂದು ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಗಳು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಇವಾಗ ನಮ್ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲೇ ಬೇರೆ ತರ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ, ಅವ್ರ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ತರ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ, ಈ ತರ ಎಲ್ಲಾರ್ನು ನಾವು ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬಂದು ಅವ್ರವ್ರ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಗಳನ್ನ, ಅವ್ರವ್ರ ದೇಶದ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾತುಕತೆ ನಡೆಸ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಮಗೆ 6 ಜನಕ್ಕಾದ್ರೂ ನೀವು ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ 3ನೇ ಡಿಮ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಇಕ್ಕಿದ್ವಿ. 4ನೇದು ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಚೀಟಿ ಒಳಗಡೆ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಒಳಗಳಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಕೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ನೀವೇ ಒಂದು ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟಡಿಯನ್ನ ಮಾಡಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ನ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತುಕತೆ ನಡೆಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ 4ನೇ ಡಿಮ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ಟಿದ್ವಿ.
Thank you, Indumati. Just to summarize what Indumati has mentioned, she actually also articulated, the entire recycling value chain. But she also talked about, and I know she's giving this context from India. She also talked about the different kinds of waste pickers that we have in India, not just landfill waste pickers, but the one who travel on foot picking up waste, the ones who travel by cycle picking up waste, and so she says, just to give an example, especially when you look at it from a landfill waste pickers, if you're planning to ban landfills or close landfills, how do you look at a just transition? So first, you would need to identify the waste pickers. Second, you would also have to look at what gainful employment that they can get. It could be, provision and door-to-door collection. It could be at aggregation centers, and then look at, closing the landfill. So in essence, she's talked about the fact that it's important to plan any kind of ban with gainful employment and not just belittling their original skills that they had. A similar point to what Lubna mentioned. She also talked about the fact that when she went to Uruguay, she met with representatives of waste pickers from different other countries. And what she highlighted was the fact that every country has a very different setup. So you can't standardize the entire thing because the whole conditions, the way they operate, the geographies are so different. What an important aspect of it, because everybody is talking about plastic ban, was she said at that meeting, she also realized about the chemicals in plastic and how is it harmful. So when you're looking at just transitions, you need to look at it. Her other demand was also the fact that when you're having these kind of discussions, waste pickers do not have the financial resources to travel. And so it's very important to look at providing some kind of financial aid for waste pickers to travel and be seated at those discussions as equals. Thank you so much, Indumati. I'm going to come back to you. I would like to move the question to John. John, the Kenyan government has given leadership to this whole just transition dialogue in the Global Plastic Treaty. If you can articulate, given your experience with organizing waste pickers, in advocating for change, in advocating for inclusion and integration, and with what the government is doing, why is it required, and how would you actually visualize or envision the whole just transition to look like post the Global Plastic Treaty in 2024?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chandran. I'm very much honored to be a speaker here today and also to get to at least meet you all. So from the Kenyan context and from the experience that I've had both in Kisumu and at the national level, and also at the UN platform where we normally try to negotiate on certain global issues, is that it is very important. I think Lubna also mentioned it in a way to also try to tweak the system. So we have been trying to also focus on changing the policies, having the policies also like incorporate, not include, because we notice that most of the time when we are pushing for inclusivity, most of the time government officials and politicians have a way of including you to their space where they have already made all the decisions and we come on board as spectators. So we've been trying to have these systems where we are incorporated from the very onset. And this is very important for us, especially from my context, because we have come to notice that most of the people that make very crucial decisions that affect our livelihoods hardly know the experiences that we go through. They totally have no idea about the livelihoods where speakers go through. And this I can quote from some government officials that have never been to Dandora dam site. That is the biggest dam site in Kenya. And they hardly can relate to the lives and the livelihoods that West speakers go through there. So some of the policies that they normally make they don't get to contextualize what the impact is going to be on the ground. So we notice that the most important thing is also to be incorporated in these policy making processes, having a seat at these tables that the decisions that greatly affect our lives are made. And I believe that we've been very aggressive with that. We were part of the UNEA 5.2 resolution, and we started negotiating with the national government from then. It is a bit sad that most of these people are political positions where, like, whenever election is done, the chances that the people that you started negotiating with chances are that they're not re-elected, and that is what actually happened in Kenya. We started the negotiation with the previous minister last year, and then the regime was not elected in this year. So we kind of renewed some of the negotiations that we already started. But the most important thing is that as we are also trying to check on the impact that is on the ground, it is very important for these governments to also have the decisions that we are talking about as policies that are written, so that whenever we are trying to execute most of the things that have been discussed and documented, they are executed as policies. And this forms based to the formalization of the work we do. If they are written as laws, then it becomes easier for them to be implemented and for us to also keep negotiating on the best ways forward. How I see a just transition is one of the things that is normally there is the closing of the dam sites. And I think this is something that is not going to be happening before there's an alternative that is given to the livelihoods that live in the dam site. And this is something that I have personally experienced when my dam site was being relocated. It was not being closed, it was being relocated. And we were never given a notice to that. And it was being relocated to a place that is about 58 kilometers away from where it was. So this really disrupted the lives of West speakers in Kisumu, most of whom never ended up working in the new dam site. But the government did it because there's not that policy or agreement that was already made there. So we noticed that as much as we are also trying to change things from the ground, there's that aspect of also trying to reach out from the apex of the policies processes. And that is something that I would say that has proven very, very important to us, because we are disadvantaged in many ways and hardly get opportunities and good spaces to sit with these people. And then the people that end up making decisions that affect our lives are people that don't really understand the livelihoods of West speakers. So it is very important to also bring on board the perspectives of or the people who are going to be affected directly. And that is something that we are finding very key in the whole value chain.
That's so true, John. I think you've touched upon so many important aspects, and I think one of which I'm also guilty of, because I remember in 2010, um, because I'm part of this, I was part of this volunteer group called Solid Waste Management Roundtable, and we were just individuals discussing what should we do about, decentralized waste management and how we can solve the problem of um, of waste. And we had proposed something called the dry waste collection center, which is basically a neighborhood recycling center. And the discussion went on and on. And that's when I met Nalini, who is the founder of Hasiru Dala. And she had joined us for this meeting. And then in that meeting, before she came in, she was very warm and welcoming. And then as the meeting progressed, she kept shaking her head and saying she was just so upset with the meeting. And I didn't realize why, what was happening. And then after the meeting, she walked out to receive a call. And I went behind her and I was like, Nalini, what's wrong? Did you agree to some of the contents of the meeting? She's like, how can you even talk about waste without waste pickers? And that's when realization stuck to me. Because I was like, there is this whole community that have been retrieving, reclaiming waste, and we have completely invisibilized them. And that was my that's how I started looking at this whole community with a newfound respect, because at so many times they would pass by us, they would be right there picking up waste, and all of us have this habit of invisibilizing. I think you rightly said that very often no one contextualizes what's happening on the ground. You make decisions at the top and you expect things to follow. And just like what Indumati also talked about, this whole aspect about planning any kind of ban or closure or whatever. And Lubna also, and you rightly said, both of you actually talked about institutionalizing the process, because otherwise, with every political change, we are then back to square one. And I know Nalini has joined. Nalini, I would definitely like you to explain that whole principles articulated by waste pickers on just transitions. And then after that, we'll move to Saloni, because I think that will actually set the context to this whole discussion. Nalini, over to you.
Pinky, I think she's
Dropped off?
yeah, she dropped off.
Okay.
Pinky, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, once Nalini joins, we'll ask her to articulate those 11 principles with practical examples, or we can ask Indumati and Lubna to elaborate that. John, before I move to Saloni, I just wanted one more question. Like how Indumati explained the different kinds of waste pickers in India, I'm wondering if you can just give us an overview of how is the whole recycling value chain in Kenya?
So the recycling value chain in Kenya is it's kind of, I would say, the recyclers who operate that at the very apex of the pyramid, and then waste pickers, where we represent, are on the very bottom of the pyramid. The recyclers like mostly have they own the factories, they have all the vehicles for transport, the transportation, and uh, at the very bottom, we the waste pickers like collect from households, because we form the same umbrella, the ones that collect from households, the ones that collect from the streets, and the ones that collect from the dump site. We form like the same, we fall under the same umbrella. In between, they're normally agents. They don't collect waste, but they kind of, because they have some resources, they trade in waste. They buy from the waste pickers, the recyclables, and sell to the recyclers. This is because most of the recyclers prefer to deal not with many people but with individuals. And this is one of the things that the association is trying to change now, because we are trying to set up a system where all the members can like converge all the recyclables to one spot, and then we negotiate with the recyclers directly. So mostly the agents are there. They've also gained a lot from I would say our work, because like they deal in the profits that we are supposed to be making. They just buy it at a very low price from us and sell it at a bit better price to the recyclers. So one of the things that we are trying to do right now is to make like a direct trade between the waste pickers and the recyclers. So like generally that is how the hierarchy is now. The waste pickers like form the very bottom of the pyramid, and this fact has brought a lot of disadvantages to us, because mostly the recyclers, because of their financial might, they tend to have like a better relationship with the politicians, because some of them like sponsor the politicians. They negotiate well with the government because they're business people. They like literally have no attachment with the environmental bit of it. They just work on the basis of how much are they going to buy it and what profit are they going to get from what they sell. So they tend to have like connection with the government. Those are some of the things that we are also coming in and trying to change, and making our life very difficult with being in the system, and like modeling a system that favors waste pickers. As things are now, the previous government was mostly having policies that identify everyone that is dealing in waste as a recycler. But then if you look at it keenly, it is modeled to represent the big recyclers. And the big recyclers hardly know where the waste comes from. They don't go to the dump site. They just have like they mostly buy from the agents. So the agents would come to the dump site, would come to the communities and buy, and then go and sell to them. So I think that is one of the other things that we have been personally trying to also follow up with the national government, and trying to change, because with the EPR system also rolling in Kenya, what I was told is that because they are the people that are a bit closer to the government, and because all the plastic mostly end up to them, and they also have records, then they also like qualify for that. So those are some of the things that we are trying to change from this side, that are, I would call that there are hurdles, but gradually changing.
Thank you so much, John. I think, yes, these are some of the very common challenges that even waste pickers in India face. And Lubna, I'll come to you with a question, but first I would like to welcome Saloni. And Saloni, my question to you is, how do you include waste pickers? If you could just throw light of the UNDP plastic program, and if you could also share a little bit about how can you make this whole initiative more inclusive by looking at waste pickers who are not part of the plastic program in the cities that you work with. The second question for you is, what should the national government and international organizations do to contribute to just transitions for workers in the, especially in the who are in the plastic recycling value chain, so if, from a just transition context? Saloni, over to you.
So thanks a lot, Pinky. Thanks for putting these questions. Thanks for moderating this whole session. So steering it so well. Of course, I'm always indebted to Nalini, not only for inspiring all of us who are working in this space, but also carrying the voice of this community to the highest forums. So really hats off to Nalini for her untiring efforts in this area. It's very nice to be here sharing the platform with Indumati and John, I think these are rare opportunities, and I don't think many organizations are really asking people who are, if we can say, bottom of the ladder to really come and speak and to share firsthand experience. And I think this is the voice that needs to be heard. And anything else, so I agree totally with what John said, that these voices need to be heard so that as we go forward, all decisions at the policy level, as well as at implementation level, needs to have incorporated these voices. Very happy to be here in this forum with you, Lubna, as well. Would be very happy to hear about your work, but maybe that's for a little later. So I'll just start talking about UNDP's work. So UNDP has a pan-India presence, and we set up material recovery facilities in cities in coordination with the urban local bodies. The program, the plastic waste program at UNDP is entirely funded by the corporate sector. So this is also UNDP in operationalizing this project has also catalyzed private funding for this space, for this sector. Not always an easy job, and we face a lot of challenges, but we also see the value in being able to leverage private sector funding, which is now increasingly available, but it needs to be channelized through agencies that have credibility and who are able to also meet the private sector expectations. So it's like marrying the development sector with the private sector. In some ways, this project is being able to do that. However, coming back to the point, so when we set up material recovery facilities, we typically would be doing material management at that facility, which would be really receiving the plastic, dry waste, doing the sorting and some primary processing before handing it over to a recycler. And in this process, so apart from the material management work, the second pillar of our work is how we can engage waste workers in the operations at the facility as wage employees. And the other way that we try and give them, so this is a direct way of giving assured and safe livelihoods to waste workers. Lubna, I agree with you. There is a challenge of giving full-time employment to women waste workers. However, we try and do it to the extent that we can, partly because somewhere we also ask our implementation partners to be cognizant of our focus on gender inclusivity amongst its workforce. And we also ask them to report their employees' record and disaggregate it for gender. So this is our way of kind of bringing the matter to everybody, to the front of everybody's agenda. So that is one activity. But other than that, at some material facilities, we are also encouraging now procuring waste from itinerant waste workers. And therefore, in some ways, enabling a payment of a fair rate, a fair and transparent rate for the plastics that they are collecting from through their various curbside collection and aggregation channels. However, and so that's where the project really started, and that's how it got conceptualized. However, once COVID struck, it just came to our attention that this disempowered community is perhaps at the receiving end of uncertainties that a pandemic can bring about. And so we started what we call the Project Uthan, which is really Rise with Resilience. And under this Project Uthan, we first conducted a fairly comprehensive baseline socioeconomic assessment of waste workers. We surveyed 9,301 waste workers across the country. I think we covered 15 states. And we came up with some very interesting insights. So this baseline study made us appreciate that in some cases, or rather I put it like this, in several cases, waste workers, so while we understand waste workers don't have the necessary documentation, but even in cases where they do have the necessary documentation, Aadhaar, PAN, etc., the linkage with the government benefit programs is fairly weak. So while they have the wherewithal to avail government benefits, and by government benefits, I mean the benefits that are there for them to avail. So it's not as though we have to lobby with the government to get them benefits. It's just that we have to access and get them the benefits that are theirs to take. So we realized that linkage was fairly weak. And that's when we launched Project Uthan. And we are now, we've completed the first phase of Project Uthan. We targeted 3,000 waste workers in the cities of Mumbai and Delhi combined. And we have ensured that each of these waste workers is now linked to at least 2 government benefit programs. So while this may sound simple to somebody who has not really worked in this space, but I can assure you, identifying a beneficiary, keeping them on board, going through their documentation, completing their documentation, and then eventually linking them to a government benefit program is a lot of on-ground work and a lot of, how should I put it, lot of follow-up on the ground. So it's been a fairly challenging space because we realized, this is a mobile workforce. So even if we've identified a beneficiary, if we go back to that same geography, maybe a month later, there's a possibility that some of the beneficiaries would have relocated. The other thing we realized that while we tell them that these benefits are for them to avail, but typically they trust institutions and these institutionalized benefits very little, because maybe over the years they've, for whatever reason, they felt bypassed or whatever. So as a consequence, it's not very easy to get them excited and therefore actively participating in the process of getting these benefits. So now, this is the success of this, the first phase of Uthan. Now we've launched the next phase, where now we're going to be targeting 20,000 beneficiaries across the country, 20,000 plus 2,000. So it will be a total of 22,000 will be the next phase of Uthan. So that is one area that we have identified where we think we can enable them to, or rather, I would say, make them more resilient to various vagaries that make them so vulnerable, or rather that heighten their vulnerability. So that's the second intervention that we've been doing with them. The third intervention that we will be launching in the third quarter of this year, and we'll be very happy to partner with Hasiru Dala and other people here sitting here, is that we're also planning to launch a helpline for waste workers, where we want to give them better access to information so that going forward we plan to plan our helpline as a two-way communication so that waste workers can get access to the required information and access to agencies that can support them in to make out here. And I think somewhere is reflected in what in Mati or with disempowered communities for some time. I've realized that it's always more impactful when we first try and understand really what they are looking for. So when we say that we were looking at a just transition or any other way of empowering this community, I think the best starting point, the way I would look at it, is first to go to them and ask them, what are you looking for? So what do you understand with just transition? Why? So if I can unpack it still further, I would say that why are you doing the work that you're already doing? And how can I help you to do it better? So does it mean that I strengthen their capacities with respect to equipping them to minimize their drudgery, financial inclusion, skills, capacities? So I would think that would be my first area of intervention, to help them to get better at whatever they're doing, wherever they are. Which is, of course, to say that this is not where we would like to limit them. The next stage would be, of course, to try and understand how and what in their sense, what is their understanding of how they can get better. And this is a very loosely I'm putting it, how they can get better empowered or more empowered. So I think that conversation will have to be a two-way conversation, because some of the, they would share their understanding, But I think that understanding, some of our understanding, and by our, I mean all of us understanding, because we may have some exposure to what is there out there in the world for them. We should also try and sensitize and have a dialogue with them to develop a shared understanding. Um, um, so that really, I mean, if you're going to propose anything for their benefit, then that benefit must emerge from ideally it should be demand driven. So I think one very important part for the waste worker community is going to be how we're going to be able to financially empower them. Now, financial empowerment has multiple stages. It could be financial inclusion. It could be greater financial literacy. How are they to understand numbers? How are they to understand record keeping? How do we get them access to bank accounts? How do we get them to trust institutions so that they are ready to put their money into a bank account and not just keep it as petty cash, which could just get lost at any point of time, lost or stolen or get spent in whatever. Are there possibilities that we can organize them into small groups like SHGs so that they can have greater access to institutional finance? How can we get them access to microfinance? And these some of these programs are already available with the government, like the Ministry of Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And we're also in conversation with NSKFDC. They have microfinance schemes for waste workers. So how do we get them in touch with these benefits that are available? So of course, the necessary documentation, of course, doing the necessary paperwork, but also how to empower them so that they're not only able to access the finance, but they're also able to do something with that finance and eventually to be able to pay off that loan if it's in the form of a loan.
Thank you so much, Saloni. I think one of the most important things that I can summarize what you said is nothing for us without us. I think that's in short the tagline for how would you look at the waste picker inclusion. But I think what from your conversation you've opened up a whole range of issues, right from the whole fact about I know from going back to what John talked about. And to what Indumati and Lubna mentioned, right from reclaiming language for waste pickers to the fact that the whole fact that you touched about NSKFDC, and I know Hasiru Dala has done a lot of work with financial literacy. But I think the key element here is trust that you brought about, and how can a community that has always been disadvantaged, vulnerable, marginalized, build that kind of trust with anybody who comes in. And Nalini is back. I think Nalini, I remember you sharing the story with me about and Lakshmi, who together with whom you all actually started Swatch. If you can just briefly touch upon these elements that Saloni mentioned, and then I want to go back to John because I really want to understand this whole idea of reclaiming language and about trust for building trust within the community and then building it upward. Like how do you negotiate with the government? But Lubna, if Nalini is not back, if Nalini is back, Nalini, can you put your camera on if you're back? And if you could just briefly share that whole story and also talk, and I really want you to highlight this whole ILO, if you could just demystify taking real life anecdotes. If you could simplify that.
I'm really sorry. I'm in a place I can't speak. I can only hear. Lubna, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Hi. So I'll just respond to the question. I actually want to touch upon two things that Saloni mentioned in her kind of speech. That demand-driven approaches are very, very critical. And that's absolutely true and absolutely essential. it is very interestingly complicated in this particular context of changes in the plastic waste and solid waste kind of domain, because waste pickers don't have access to the kind of information that's going to affect them in the future, whether it be through changes in SWM, that the city is investing in a different kind of system for waste collection, or it is the upcoming implementation of the EPR guidelines that may change how recycling is managed in the country. It's so difficult to have a demand-driven process where waste pickers aren't aware of it's a storm that they don't see coming. Uh, and while it's very, very important, there's so many layers of marginalization there that waste pickers don't have access typically to policy changes and those kind of top-down, sweeping top-down changes that are happening in the sector. And it's all the more responsibility for people like us, like I was just thinking about Pinky's anecdote, it's all the more responsibility for all conversations about waste to necessarily include this element as a consideration. And it's not a nice to have, it needs to be kind of squarely a core consideration within the system, or else it's just not going to be possible to integrate waste, because many times what you hear is recycling will go down and reuse will kind of come into play, and there will be new jobs created. But if you just look a little deeper into what that would look like, reuse jobs would require completely different skill sets. They would require, it would be a completely different economy. And with waste pickers right now, it's so difficult for us to even argue for, like Saloni was saying, access to schemes that are already there for us. It's so difficult for us to even get access, very, very high barriers to entry. There's so much difficulty in getting waste pickers acknowledged within recycling and acknowledged within solid waste to begin with, that assuming that a new economy or a new sector is going to automatically absorb these kind of dispossessed livelihoods is really far-fetched thinking, and it's really unfair for people like us who are designing systems and who are hopefully influencing policy in some way or the other, not to consider our system design in that holistic fashion. So several elements of this, including social security, like UNDP has rightly recognized, is something that needs to be worked on in parallel. It's not going to happen by just increasing your rates for recyclables. It needs to be something that you work on, including support for accessing schemes and support for actually getting your documentation in order. It's again not enough to just have a scheme in place. You need ideally 100%, but close to 100% of people actually accessing that to see any tangible change. Or else what we are going to be left with in the long run is really waste pickers who are not able to financially and socioeconomically transition out of the position that they find themselves in. The idea with a just transition and the idea with actually leveraging government support and private investment is to ensure that there is enough of a system shift, that you don't have people that are reliant on this occupation a generation or two down the line. And you can do that by ensuring better outcomes, but in a holistic fashion. So closing the loop on everything, including social security, including upskilling, including capacity building. And unfortunately, all of this seems like a lot for a plastic producer who wants to just know how much that 1 ton of plastic recycling certificate should cost. But if we are not adding on all of these costs to say our minimum mandated EPR costs, we're just going to create a problem where we are systematically kind of leaving out waste pickers and not even giving them an opportunity to benefit from this new system.
Thank you so much, Lubna. I think you rightly talked, because my next question was supposed to be about reuse because that's like the buzzword right now. And you actually talked about it. I think I remember when you talked about demand-driven thing, and John also mentioned the similar thing about when the landfill was not even closing, it was relocating. There was nothing. There was no consultation at all. Indumati, before I go to you, because Saloni actually mentioned a very important thing about survey, and that was one of your demands at the INC. John, I just wanted to ask you from a practical example. if you're looking at designing waste picker incorporation, I think that's the new term that I've learned, because I think for long, like I always use Lakshmi, who's the founder of such, co-founder of such analogy, which says when you use inclusion and integrated, both of them are such contested words that it often overlaps, but in the guise of you know enveloping something that can be so beautifully designed. So, John, if you can just tell us practically how would it work if you have to look at like what Lubna said, waste pickers are not aware and waste pickers don't have access. But if you have to translate it into a simple practice on the ground, how would it look like?
I think what Lukna says is very accurate, because just like I also mentioned before, that West speakers are disadvantaged in very many ways. We most of us are very underprivileged to the point that very few access basic education, and it is the same with the medical covers. The West speakers right now, like in Kenya, very few of them like can afford the government basic medical cover. That is one of the biggest challenges that we have. So because most of us can hardly like engage with the society or with people, and I say this because this is something that I've also gone through. At a very young age, there's that social stigma where like we are related with everything negative. The authorities are not always like wanting to arrest like West, because mostly if they see the authorities normally running even without doing anything bad, because you'd be arrested because you are a West speaker. Most of us don't access education. Very few of us access education, making like limiting uh, the number of us that can represent in formal spaces. And I think this is also something that we already mentioned even when we were attending the INC and the UNEA, that there should be some training for us, because these are spaces that we are not very much used to. The job that we are normally used to are jobs that uh, are mostly physical and outdoor, and uh, not very much on not very much on policies, and we know things that are like literal practical, and uh, this is something that because we represent uh, our colleagues, we start also trying to learn new spaces. So oh, it is true for sure that most of us don't access very vital information that we should be accessing and that we should be putting in practice, and also relaying to our fellows. Uh, this is also because we don't get like a lot from the job we do. Uh, on bad days, where speakers would hardly like even get money enough for 2 meals a day. So these are some of the things that gets it a bit difficult to engage. And one of the solutions that I came to realize that it's better it's more easier to engage West speakers with their fellow West speakers. Like I've had easier time engaging with my colleagues from different counties. Like in Kenya, we have 47 counties, and it has been way much more easier for me to engage with my colleagues from different counties, even when we don't speak like the same language, than other people that are not West speakers, because it's so easy for me to relate and to bond with them, because like we share the same reality, and it's something that they can easily see that this is one of us. And I would say that is one of the points that has been revealing that it's easier for West speakers to engage themselves it has also been proven possible that waste pickers can properly organize themselves, because we are doing it, obviously with support, because there's some technical support that are required that most of us don't really have. There's a lot of capacity building that we also need, that we've been like sorting from different organizations and partners and friends. I think that would be my point for that.
Thank you so much. I think you rightly said. I know Lubna, Indumati, and Saloni have touched about social security aspect, but I think you brought about an important dimension about education, because education also limits representation. I think that's an very important takeaway. Indumati, my next question is to you. You had very specifically demanded that waste pickers, I mean, not just waste pickers, but the entire recycling value chain needs to be formally documented. Can you elaborate on why you said that? I know Saloni made some important observations about the baseline survey, but if you can tell us about your ask at the INC 1, that would be really helpful.
ಇಂದುಮತಿ ಅವರೇ, ಸೊ ಅವ್ರ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಏನಂದ್ರೆ, ನಿಮ್ ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಮತ್ತೆ ರೀಸೈಕ್ಲಿಂಗ್ ಚೈನ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು, ಒಂದು ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್ ನೀವು ಇಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ, ಸೊ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ?
ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಆ ತರ ಡಿಮ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ಟಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ಗೆ ನನ್ನ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ ಯಾವ ತರ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ವಿ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಒಂದು ಮನ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾನು ಅದನ್ನ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಕ್ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಆಯ್ತು. ಯಾವ ತರ ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಫಸ್ಟ್ ನಾನು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಅವತ್ತಿಂದು ಹೋಗಿ 100 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ದುಡಿದ್ರೆ ಅವತ್ತಿಂದ ಒಂದ್ ಕೆಜಿ ಬೇಳೆ, 1 ಕೆಜಿ ಅಕ್ಕಿ, 100 ಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಬೇಳೆ ಆ ತರ ತಗೊಂಬಂದು ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಹಂಗೆ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಗಳ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ನನ್ನ ಕೈಲಿ ತಡ್ಕೊಳಕ್ ಆಗದೆ ಇರೋಂತ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಒಂದು ಸ್ಕ್ರಾಪ್ ಶಾಪ್ ತರ ಅಂಗಡಿ ಇಟ್ಟೆ. ಒಂದ್ ಸುತ್ತ ಶೀಟ್ ಹಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅಂಗಡಿ ಇಟ್ಟೆ. ಅಂಗಡಿ ಇಟ್ಮೇಲೂ ನನಗೆ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಯಾರು ತಂದು ಹಾಕಿಲ್ಲ. ಅವಾಗ ನಾನು ವೈನ್ ಶಾಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ನ ಕಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಸಗ್ರಿಗೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋ ಅಂತ ಹಣವನ್ನ ಬಾಡಿಗೆ ಕಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಆತರ ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ಬೇಕಾರೆ ನನಗೆ 2012ರಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಹಸಿರು ದಳ ಪರಿಚಯ ಆಯ್ತು. ಹಸಿರು ದಳ ಪರಿಚಯ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಆ ಹಸಿರು ದಳದಿಂದ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ತರ ನಾವು ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು, ಧೈರ್ಯ ಯಾವ ತರ ತಗೋಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಯಾವ ತರ ಡಿಸಿಪ್ಲಿನ್ ನಾವು ಕಲಿಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕಲ್ತ ಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ID ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ID ಇಂದ ಡೋರ್ ಟು ಡೋರ್ ಕಲೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಇಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂದ್ರು. ಬಟ್ ಅವಾಗ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಫೈನಾನ್ಸಿಯಲ್ ಕೂಡ ನನ್ನ ಹತ್ರ ಹಣ ಕೂಡ, ಒಂದು ಗಾಡಿ ಹಾಕೋ ಅಂತ ಹಣ ಕೂಡ ನನ್ನ ಹತ್ರ ಇರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ನಾನು ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ಧೈರ್ಯ ತಗೊಂಡ್ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆ ಹಾಕ್ದೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಒಂದು ಬಿಲ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ಕಟ್ಟಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮೇನ್ ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಂಗ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು. ಆತರ ನಾನು ನಮ್ಮ ಹಸಿರು ದಳ ನನಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರೋ ಧೈರ್ಯ, ನಮ್ಮ ಹಸಿರು ದಳ ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್ ಆಗಿ ನನಗೆ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡೈತೆ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾನು ಅದನ್ನ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಕಟ್ಟೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನ. ಆತರ ಆಗಿ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ 3 ಗಾಡಿ ಹಾಕೊಂಡ್ವಿ. 3 ಗಾಡಿ ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಇವತ್ತು 6 ಗಾಡಿ ಆಯ್ತು, 6ರಿಂದ 12 ಆಯ್ತು, 12ಇಂದ ಇವತ್ತು 18 ಗಾಡಿಗಳು ಹಾಕಿದೀವಿ. 18 ಗಾಡಿಯಿಂದನೂ ಅದು ಯಾವ ತರ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ. ಒಂದೊಂದು ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ನು ನಾನು ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಲಿಂದಾನೇ ಕಲ್ತಿದ್ದು. ಯಾವ ತರ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನ ಪ್ಲಾನ್, ಒಂದೊಂದು ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ನನಗೆ ಮನ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇದಾಯ್ತು. ಆ ತರ ಆದಾಗ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನ ಮುಂದುವರ್ಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಇವತ್ತು 88 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಕೆಲ್ಸ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೂ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಈ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಂಗ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಂದು ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್ ಹತ್ತಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ನೀನ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ ಅನ್ನ ಹತ್ತಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗುವಂತ, ಆತರ ನಾನು ಒಂದೊಂದು ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ ಆಗಿ ನಾನು ಆತರ ಒಂದು ಮನ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಎಲ್ಲಾ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಪಿಕರ್ಸ್ಗುನು ಈ ತರ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ ಬರ್ಬೇಕು, ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ನಮ್ ತರ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಮನ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾನು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ನ ಮಾತಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ.
ಅದೊಂದೇ ಅಲ್ಲ ಇಂದುಮತಿ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರು. ನೀವು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ವಾ, ಯಾಕೆ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು?
ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಒಬ್ಬೊಬ್ರು ಒಂದೊಂದ್ ತರ ಇವ್ರು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ನ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಇದ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕಂಪ್ನಿಯವರು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಆ ತರ ಆಗಿ ಇವಾಗ ಒಂದು ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾನು ಒಂದು ಉದಾಹರಣೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಒಂದು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ಗೂ ಒಂದು ರೋಗಿಗೂ ಇರೋ ಸಂಬಂಧ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ಸ್ಗೂ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ಗೂ ಇರೋ ಸಂಬಂಧ. ಆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೂ ರೋಗಿಗೆ ಮೇಲಾಗಲ್ಲ, ರೋಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೂ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ಗೆ ಇದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ತರ ಒಂದು ಸಂಬಂಧ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ಗೂ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ಗೂ ಇರೋ ಸಂಬಂಧ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವೇನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮುಖ್ಯ ಈ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಈ ರೀಸೈಕ್ಲಿಂಗ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅಂತ ಅವರೇ ಆಲೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಮನ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ವಿ.
Nalini, do you want to translate what she said? Because she talked about the foundation example that you very beautifully articulate.
Yeah, basically, first one, she talked about in just transition, what we need to do. She said, I started, doing waste picking. I used to get 1 kilo of rice and 300 grams of dal. That's how I started my day. And then I put a scrap shop kind of a thing, but we were not getting material. Then I met Hasiru Dala. They gave ID card. They said they will give us drivers vehicles to collect door to door. So that's how it happened. I started with 3 vehicles and then 12 vehicles. Today I have 18 vehicles and I've been able to give job for 88 people. And that is because I got like a building, you need a strong foundation. Like that, I got all the foundation from Hasiru Dala as a training. So I was able to build, they gave us those training, but I was able to build on that. Step by step, I went. And when I asked her why, I also told her that you asked for the study, why that study is required. So she said people should understand what we do. And they need to understand, they will understand themselves once they have a study to see our contribution. That's why we had put that demand also.
Nalini, since you're here, I know we are running short of time, but can you quickly summarize those 11 principles from, what the waste pickers demand are, especially from India?
So in India, the 11 demands, 9 of them anyway is articulated by ILO. The 3 specific demands that our waste pickers have articulated, one is we need time for transition. We need to have the capacity building, that is training and all those kind of capacity building that we need. And the third thing they talked about is they need to be able to use, for example, internet. Learn how to use different information and work on it. So these are the 3 additional demands they have done with the 9 demands of the ILO, which has ability to bargain at workplace, safety at workplace, green jobs, being part of the green economy, and others that they have articulated. So these 3 have specifically come out of Karnataka waste pickers. There are 50 waste pickers across Karnataka state came together to talk about it, and that has already been submitted to ILO, and they have said they will definitely consider.
Thank you so much, Nalini. So I would like to request all of you, if you can just share your last thoughts about how we can build momentum to actualize just transition in true letter and spirit. And it shouldn't just be like a paper tiger and just for the records, or just to showcase, or just to tick box. So how can it be actualized in practice? So if each of you can actually share that. And Saloni, I think you missed one part of my question in the previous this thing is about what role can UNDP play in terms of actualizing or translating this into practice. So we'll start with Lubna first. Lubna, your concluding remarks.
Sure. We've discussed the complexities of the issue, so it's definitely going to take multiple actors to be interested in this. And I think what we need to do as a first step is to actually build that interest in all of the some at the state level, some at the national level. I think we need to look at where really the changes are happening and make sure that we are making our voices heard at those levels and making sure we don't lose momentum. There's a big risk now. I know there's also an opportunity, but there's a big risk that these changes may happen in a way that does not work for the informal sector. And so I think strategically working on ensuring that letter and then also implementation is happening in a way that actually works for this sector is critical now because of all of the movement happening at both the national and international level. But at the same time, groups on the ground need to be able to act on it. So waste picker groups on the ground, strengthening them as well to be able to act on it once there are, or hopefully once there are legislations and regulations that allow for integration. So we need capacity building at all levels. Now.
Thank you, Lubna. John?
Okay. My speech will be that waste speakers have that historic knowledge and historic depth that I'd say that the governments and communities like owe for the job over years that have been done. And specifically speaking about just transition, that aspect of being fair and inclusive, and most importantly, leaving no one behind. So it is very important that waste speakers like take center stage in this, because we are normally by the government considered not very much considered, because we operate from the lowest level pyramid. And most of the time, when these policies are being made, they're made without.
You're on mute, John.
Important. Hello? Hello?
We can hear you now.
So it is very important to have the voices of the speakers, especially on this, because we play that very crucial role in waste and in plastic.
Thank you. Indumati? Priyanka, do you want to translate that?
Immediately ಅವರೇ just ನಿಮ್ದು last ಒಂದು conclusion ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ meeting ಬಗ್ಗೆ.
Conclusion, and also how can she look at taking this forward? I mean, how can we put this in practice?
So ಇದು last ನಿಮ್ದು just transition practical ಅಂದ್ರೆ ground ನಿಮ್ ಕೆಲ್ಸದಿಂದ ಹೇಗೆ just transition ಮಾಡಿ
ಇವಾಗ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ನೀವು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಮುಂದೆ ಇಂದುಮತಿ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಿಷನ್ ನಾವ್ ಎಲ್ಲಾ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ ಹೆಂಗ್ ತಗೊಂಡ್ ಹೋಗೋಣ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ನಾನ್ ಯಾವ ತರ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ತಗೊಂಡೆ ಆ ತರ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಫೈನಾನ್ಸಿಯಲ್ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಫೈನಾನ್ಸಿಯಲ್ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಲೋನ್ಗಳು ಮಾಡಿಸಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾವ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕರ್ಗುನು ಇವಾಗ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಷ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಬಟ್ ಅವರು ನಾವು ಈ ತರ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲ ಯಾವ ತರ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು ಅದೇ ತರ ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ಸೇರಿ ಇವಾಗ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಆ ತರ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಖಂಡಿತವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಅವರು ಈ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಿಷನ್ಗೆ ಬರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಐತೆ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಬೇಕು, ಫೈನಾನ್ಸಿಯಲ್ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಬೇಕು. ಈ ಎರಡು ತುಂಬಾ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್.
Thank you, Indumati. Nalini, do you want to quickly translate?
Yeah, what she's saying is one of the things that we have to do some investment in terms of training everybody, having access to finances. These are very important things so that we can get more people into this just transition.
Thank you. Saloni, over to you.
Sorry?
No, I said Saloni, over to you. Saloni, you're on mute. We couldn't hear you.
So thanks, Mickey. So as I had mentioned, I think it's important first to understand really what their requirement is, but also I think to understand the headwinds out here. And I would in that respect agree with Lubna that let's try and understand really what kind of capacities this cohort requires in order to be able to get onboarded as a part of the formal sector. I think there is merit in that, but of course it will be, I think it would be presumptuous to say that this entire space can be formalized. I mean, there will be still a considerable chunk which will continue to work in the informal sector and which will come into the formal space over time. But that duration could be long. So we should we need to understand in collaboration with them, in conversation with them, really what capacities they require or what training they require in order to be able to potentially become a contender to be a part of the formal sector. So that in my we are looking at social inclusion. By that I mean connecting with government benefit programs. We're also looking at the helpline, as I had shared with you. We would also like to explore the possibilities of now working on skilling this cohort, and thereby enabling them to make the transition. Whether, or rather I would say, put it like this, stay where they are and do it more efficiently and in a more rewarding way. And if they want to transition to new job roles, whether it is within the waste sector or related sectors or even outside this sector altogether, what kind of skilling we can help them with. So that would be the focus that UNDP intends to have in the times to come. Thanks.
Thank you. Nalini, your concluding remarks?
Yeah, maybe this was discussed earlier. I think first thing is identification. This has to be within the legal framework, should be done with the sanction of the local authorities, local government. So that is the first step towards just transition. We are happy to say Karnataka government has issued two circulars again, one end of last year in urban local bodies to give ID cards to everybody, and the Rural Development Department has done the similar thing in January 2023. So probably this will be the first state to do so, and we want every state to do it. And even if it is done in the first state, it's a big challenge for us to make it happen actually. So I think first identification by the state that they are, the waste pickers. So that is the first step towards just transition.
Thank you so much. I think there are too many layers that we still haven't been able to discuss because of shortage of time. But I think there are some very, very important takeaways. I think like what Nalini mentioned, time, training and technology, definitely. But the other aspect that that all the three of them brought about, Lubna, Lubna, Indumati, John, and Saloni, is also of the fact that you can't just merely acknowledge waste pickers, and I think we must also not look at it as a one size fit all policy approach, but the fact that it needs to expand to the benefits need to expand to the entire informal recycling industry. And you can't just merely co-opt waste pickers in any plan, because co-opting them then would result in threatening their livelihood, in earning fair compensation. It fails to create opportunities for social mobility. It also, in fact, destroys natural waste markets, like what Lubna mentioned. And it also, in some form, criminalizes informal recycling. And it no doubt would perpetuate inequalities through privatization. It will deepen discrimination, and of course, increase harassment. So when you're looking at inclusion, I know Saloni mentioned this whole word about trust, but it means, I think, respecting the different systems, setting systems, operations, and the varied groups in the informal waste space. And we need to allow full participation in policy design and governance, not just having a seat at the table, but being able to speak loud and clear, articulate the demands, because we can't, we have to move beyond register, regulate, tax, and we really really need to look at building that or enhancing that voice to improve technical capacity, to access finance, to upgrade infrastructure, to access to skill upgradation and social security. So basically, it means acknowledging and respecting that entrepreneurial nature of work. I must, I know we've extended time and there is still a lot more to discuss, but but we'll have to close it this time, and maybe we can look at planning another one where we can take these discussions forward. So thank you everyone for being a part of today's discussion, and I just want to conclude with Krishna, who's another waste entrepreneurs quote. He had mentioned at one of the meetings, with the right support, waste pickers and other informal recyclers can become key enablers in solving the plastic problem. For that, we need to be invited to the table to discuss policies that will affect our livelihood. And until such time you see us as partners in this, the problem is not going anywhere. And so have a good evening, and thank you everyone for participating. If anybody has questions, as this video is going to be uploaded on YouTube, do feel free to email Hasiru Dala, and we will answer your questions. Thank you so much. Can we quickly take a group picture, please? I can request everyone to put on their cameras. Thank you. I can see Bianca and Nalini. Yes. Okay. Who's taking the picture? Akbar, are you taking the picture? John, Indumati, I want your cameras on. Okay. Let me just take a picture. Akshay, I can see you. Maybe you can just put on your camera. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Now let me take a picture. 1 minute.
Thank you, Pinky, for pitching in. Thank you to all the speakers.
Thank you. Indumati, your camera is not on, but sorry again. Smile again. Nalini, come back. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.